2, 1. You're live.
Hi, everyone. Welcome from Israel. Yehuda Shamroth here, Ramat Beit Shemesh, Joshua Wander from the Old City. I'm going to say it wrong. I'll let him tell you where he's from. He's from
Har-Hazeitim.
Har-Hazeitim. I would say Har-Hazeitim. Rabbi Winston from Telstone. We're here from Bring Them Home Project, israeltorah.org.il. Bring Them Home is a project to provide Torah resources that explain and prove why Jews should consider Aliyah as a viable life option today more than ever. We have a beautiful website that Josh has been working on very fastidiously and spends lots of time and efforts and energies on. It's bringthemhome.org.il. And he's got a podcast on anchor.com, and we'll give you all these links in a little while. Josh does a daily podcast about Aliyah, and he interviews all kinds of interesting people. We want to talk about constantly talk about Gadol Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, Geula Shalema. We have all these things tied up into one. I represent the Miriam Project, which is I call the worldwide call to action for all Jewish people to celebrate the imminent Geula Shalema. So that's my part of the project, and I think at this time in history is, of course, times of Geula, which it is. I mean, I'm not the only one that thinks that. We can always hear from other people. I do interview people on the topic on SoundCloud.com. So we'll provide all these links. You can go to the Bring Them Home website. You can watch live right now on YouTube channel. You can also hear interesting videos from different Gedolim and Gedolot from all over the world, explaining why it's time to make Aliyah now. You can read blog posts, and you can get a lot of resources about making Aliyah. And there is an emergency Aliyah Facebook page also on Facebook. All right. So we were, without further ado, we will introduce Rabbi Winston, who does not like long introductions, but everyone knows him, I hope by now, as an amazing, eminent rabbi of our times. He is going to speak tonight in a topic called This Time in History from the Kabbalistic Point of View. And we know Rabbi Winston comes from Toronto. He's been in Telstone for many years, worked for Eish HaTorah for many, many years, and he's a prolific writer and author and makes videos and makes webinars, beautiful online bookstore. You can learn all about the Geula, about Kabbalah, about reincarnation. His website is 36.org. It's his online bookstore, and I'm right now participating in an amazing weekly webinar, 4-time series. We finished Mindfulness, Torah, and Redemption, and now we're moving on to the end is near with a question mark. So it's very interesting, fascinating stuff. So without further ado, please welcome Rabbi Pinchas Winston on This Time in History according to Kabbalistic Point of View. Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, Josh.
Thanks. The main point I want to discuss this evening, really 4 different ideas that are important for understanding Jewish history. Because Jewish history is not straightforward, that's for sure. It's very convoluted. Lots of things have happened over time that, in retrospect, we just take them for granted that they occurred the way they occurred, and becomes the new normal, so to speak. But at the time, they certainly fooled a lot of people. And if you analyze them, they make you think what's going on. You go, God can do anything. Why do it that way? So there are 4 important concepts to know, to understand, to appreciate, to have some exposure to them, at least because they put things more in perspective. It's information is a very, very powerful device for being able to, change your perspective. Our perception of reality is based upon our assumptions of life. What we assume about life, that colors the way we see things. And people assume very often that what I see is what I get. That's the reality, and they can't understand why people say things differently, and so differently, and even dangerously differently sometimes. But the reality is, as much as we see with our eyes and hear with our ears, it's not where we're analyzing information that takes place at the back of the head in the brain somewhere, where it's just all the information is funneled there from the eyes, from the ears, from the nose and the mouth, and different senses we have that takes in information. And then it's analyzed based upon what do we use to try to appreciate, understand what it is we're confronting and how it's affecting our lives. And that has to do with what you were taught growing up, and the assumptions about life that you have that basically you accept as fact, regardless of where they came from. And that's why it's so important that, from a very young age to make sure you're learning the right thing, because if a person grows up with faulty assumptions, they will live the rest of their life with faulty perceptions. And that has been the history of mankind for almost 6,000 years. That has been the history of the Jewish people, certainly for the last couple thousand years, because we're always stuck with this one question that kind of gnaws at us if you pay attention to it, and that is, why is it that the Jewish people seem to be the last to know that the exile is coming to a close and that it's going to become dangerous? And we're always getting stuck. We're always getting stuck at the end of an exile, and whatever we accomplish, whatever we built up, somehow it gets taken away from it, we lose it. And it begs the question, that this is a recurring pattern in history. Is there something to it? Is there something I should pay attention to in order to be able to prepare myself for what's coming up next? And the answer, of course, is yes, because the Torah itself tells us in Parshas Azinu that these patterns are real and they do recur. And as they say, those who forget are doomed to repeat. And that's certainly been the story of the Jewish people and all of mankind, for that matter. Just 25 years later, World War II began after World War I. And it's hard to believe, but it did. And now we're talking about potentially World War III and the way the world's going right now, either from a historical point of view, from a divine providence point of view. It's not positive. It's not good. And we have the power to change it. And even if we can't change it globally for everybody, at least we can look out for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, and make decisions. Because even during the Holocaust, even during World War II, lots of Jews, not enough, but many Jews saw the writing on the wall and they got out and they responded to the situation, and in other places too. And it's important to be able to have that power to make the decision, because unfortunately that too many times, as the Maharal points out, this parish on Haggadah of Lechem Oni, we become entrapped by our false assumptions, our false presumptions, our false perceptions, and that can definitely snare us and make it difficult to be able to have safety at a time that the world becomes a dangerous place. Anyhow, so there's 4 concepts specifically. I think it's important to point out. When I learned them, they had a tremendous impact on my life, my perspective, and I've looked at the world through these glasses, these concepts, ever since, through the mind's eye. And it's what allows you to be able to see things more the way God sees things. And that's what you want to do. That's what Torah learning is all about, for the most part. I mean, it teaches you the halachas, it teaches you how to behave, it teaches you character traits and character development, potential development, all these things 100%. But the main point of Torah is to put us literally on the same page as God, because He's got His agenda and He has His plan, and He will carry it out no matter what, and no one can stop Him. And it's a fact. It's all, by God, it's already done, even if it hasn't unfolded for us. The rest of us, right? People have lots of plans and lots of ideas and lots of conspiracies, but it doesn't make a difference. But Tzas Hashem, He said, cool. The bottom line is that God's will be carried through. So it pays to be on the same page as God, because if you are, then you can see it the way He's doing it and know how to respond accurately. So again, 4 concepts. The first one appears in the Gemara in Bruchos. The Gemara in Bruchos on Yud Amud Aleph, which is 10a, and Bruchos is the first tractate of the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud Bavli. Bruchos is blessings, because it deals primarily with laws of it's in the section of laws of agriculture, Zroim, but it deals with blessings, Bruchos, Shmoneh Esrei, different things like that. But there's a lot of Agadata. There's a whole section on dreams, for example. There's a lot of midrashim inside of it. And in one section of midrash, it says, that brings a pasuk down of a certain verse, and God tells Yeshaya, the prophet Yeshaya, to go to Chizkiah, who he wasn't on the best terms with, even though they're both righteous people, tzaddikim. He was a prophet. Chizkiah was also a prophet. And the king, the righteous king, who almost became Mashiach, the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin, that he turned the whole country away from idol worship, fixed up his father's terrible sins, who was the king before him, and got the Jewish people back on track, and almost was able to bring the world to a point of the Messianic era. Anyhow, Yeshai is told to go to him and say to him that he has to prepare himself because he's going to die. He's sick right now. He's sick in bed, very sick, deathly ill. And Yeshai is told to go to him and tell him he has to prepare himself because he's going to die not just to this world, but to the next world. He's not going to the world to come, or at least he's not going to have a portion in the world to come. And when you read this Gemara, you think to yourself, wait a second, wasn't this the one who was almost Mashiach? He was the one who like almost was the savior of the Jewish people. A huge, monstrous Gog and Magog type miracle happened for him. Sennacherib took 185,000 platoons, not soldiers, but platoons, which he borrowed. It was literally a United Nations force because he took troops from different countries. He enlisted them into his army, promising to return them because we're going to go fight against a tiny little Jewish nation. What could possibly go wrong? And he surrounds Jerusalem. He sieges the city of Yerushalayim. And they take a vote inside the city of Yerushalayim, the old city. We're talking about the old city, not the new city, because it wasn't built yet, but the old city. And they take a vote, and they decide there's a majority vote to surrender to Sennacherib. So Chizkiah assumes, the Torah tells you, Achrei Rabim Lahatos, you go after the majority to make decisions like this. Mostly the Sanhedrin and based in, but the majority decides this is what we should do. We should go with it. So Chizkiah, against his better judgment, was prepared to acknowledge the other side and to be machni himself, to hum himself, to give into it and to surrender. Just before they get a chance to do that, Yeshaya shows up and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm going to surrender to Sennacherib because we took a vote. The majority of us here in the old city voted to surrender. I don't want to surrender, but that's what they're saying. They want to surrender." So Yeshaya says, "No, that doesn't count here. You know why? Because a majority has to be made up of people who have the proper hashkafa, the proper Torah, the proper, halachic approach to life, and they can make that decision as part of a majority. But if you have people like, who you over here, these people who are capitulated because they're afraid, they don't have trust in God, etc., they don't count. So as far as you're concerned, the majority has not decided to surrender and don't." Because he's relieved. I mean, he hasn't solved the problem yet of all these troops all around him, like literally massive army that I think most people today would simply die from the shock of it. And as an act of bitachon and emunah and righteousness, what does Chizkiah do? What would most of us do? We'd stay up the entire night trying to come up with a plan or dig a hole to get out of the thing, some kind of tunnel, or say prayers, whatever. But we wouldn't go to bed. How could you sleep like that? But that's what he did. Chizkiah went to sleep, and he slept soundly. You know why? Because he said to Kodesh Baruch Hu, he said to Hashem, "You run the world. You brought these troops here. You can take them away. You can get rid of them if you want. And I'm going to put all my trust in you that this situation somehow is going to work out for the good." And he went to bed, and he slept. He wakes up the next morning, looks out the window, anticipating something, and he sees the hills are covered with dead soldiers. Literally dead. In the course of a couple hours at night while he was sleeping soundly and dreaming, going to Shemaim, learning Torah in the base medrash Lamala, down below a plague broke out and started to kill soldiers. Then there was a panic and people trampled one another. And even the people who, part of Chizkiah's camp, who wanted to capitulate and go with the Assyrians, instead, they went out and they gave themselves over. And because of what happened, they ended up being killed, and nastily too in the process. They didn't get anywhere with that. And Sennacherib is forced to flee for his life because he just lost all these foreign troops that he promised to bring back in good shape. And Chizkiah won. The war was over. The people of the old city of Eretz Yisrael, really, of the kingdom of Yehuda at least, survived this attack. Phenomenal miracle. The Gemara says this was supposed to be the war of Gog and Magog. Chizkiah was supposed to be Mashiach. Sennacherib and his troops, Gog and Magog. And if only Chizkiah had, praised Hashem enough after the miracle, that he would have been Mashiach. That's what the Gemara says. So Biur requires explanation. Lots of commentators talk about this and explain what was really going on, what was he thinking, because he was righteous. But again, that's a whole different shir to itself. The main point was that this was the righteous Chizkiah. And now he's lying on his deathbed. And the same prophet told him, you're the majority, not them. He's coming to speak to him, to tell him that not only are you not going to survive this world, but you're not even going to the world to come. What was the reversal due to? So he asked, he says, what was my sin? What did I do so wrong? You weren't mekayim the mitzvah of priva rivia. You didn't get married, so you won't have children. Because once you get married, after I have children, you get married, yes, again, you won't have children. Because so there's a reason for that. It's not because I'm too busy or I'm not interested in getting married. I'd like to get married. The problem is, I had a prophecy that if I get married, have a child, my son will undo all the good that I have done up until now. And he's going to turn this country back to Avodah like his grandfather. And I don't want a part of that. I don't want to be, the reason, the cause of that. Someone else has a child that does it. What can I do? I can't stop that. But my son to be the one who's going to cause all the trouble, forget it. See, Yeshaya doesn't show sympathy to his response. He comes back and he says a remarkable thing. Basically, he says, what business do you have with kavshei de rachmana? Kavshei de rachmana. Literally, the crushed, the suppressed things of Rahmana means merciful one, referring back to God. What business do you have with the secrets of God? Why are you playing God? That's what he's asking him. Your job is to do the mitzvah. God gives you a mitzvah, you have to do it. The fact that you had a prophecy about Benashe that might come true, might not come true, it's not your business. You can't push off the mitzvah for this prophecy. So therefore, you have to go ahead, get married, have a child, and then maybe you can fix yourself up a bit and not only get back life in this world, but get back your world to come, which is exactly what Chizkiah does. He gets back 15 years of his life, and he survives longer. And he says to Yeshai, I'll tell you what, let's lessen the odds of my having a Menashe. How about I marry your daughter, because you're righteous and your daughter is got to be righteous for sure, and the two righteous, me and her coming together in a union to get married, it's got to produce a righteous child. At least, that's how can you do better than that? And they got married, and they had Menashe, anyhow, who turned the country to Avodah Zarah for about 22 years before finally doing tshuva. At the end, Kavshei Rachmana, the mysteries of God. What does it mean, mysteries of God? It means you have to understand that as much as we think we understand this world and what God is doing, and that, as much as we understand, that's as much as God thinks, is ridiculous. Aside from being arrogant, but it's absolutely incredibly ridiculous. We're so limited. Our minds are so closed in terms of what they can absorb and reach. We're still trying to understand even more basic things. We're told by Kabbalah that even the Torah we have today, the deepest parts of Torah we have today, the most difficult sections that we have to understand today that could take you days sometimes, even as a genius, to work out, they pale next to the type of Torah we'll be learning in Yom HaMashiach. Even Kabbalah, which seems to be so phenomenally profound and deep, is not the full Kabbalah yet. It's just a fraction of it. Hard to imagine, hard to see how that's true, but that's what it says. That's the reality. So you can't second guess God. That's what Yeshai is telling Chizkiah. You can't second guess God. You have to do, but you have to understand there's a thing called Kavshei de Rachmana, the mysteries of God. When things seem to be exactly the opposite of what you think God should be doing at this time, what history should be doing. When people getting away with things, how can God allow these people to do this? How can so much falsehood, and so much corruption exist? And how can this guy become so wealthy and be able to use his money for so much evil? And he's like, if I was running the world, that's not what I would do. Well, that's not entirely true, by the way, because if you were running the world and you were God, it'd be the exact same thing as God's doing. But we're not running the world because we're not God. And we have to understand a fraction of it. We have to understand this concept called Kavshei Rachmana. Just because a situation doesn't make sense to us doesn't mean it doesn't make sense to God. And that's where things like bitachon and emunah, trust and faith in God, comes in. Because if I can understand everything and put it on perspective, I don't need trust and faith in God. And that's why you found for many years, as history was rolling along, as people expected it to, the way logically it should, people did not require that much bituchon emunah. They left it by the wayside. But now, as the situation starts to unfold and go in a direction that people didn't see a year ago, or even some people did, by the way. You can go back even to 2002 and 2004, and there were some analysts who saw it was coming down the road. It wasn't yet showing up, but they saw that the warning signs, early warning signs, and now it's come to fruition. That's concept number one. What's concept number two? Concept number two is from a Gemara Menachos on the Chof Tes Amud Beis, very famous story. Moshe Rabbeinu is invited up the mountain to receive Torah, talk to God, and he comes up and he sees God writing Sefer Torah. He's writing the letters in the Torah, and he's putting little crowns on top of the letters. And Moshe says, Mima kevas yadecha, who's holding back your hand? That's the literal language. Who is holding back your hand? Doesn't quite make sense until Kabbalah explains it. But it's translated as, why are you doing that? Why are you putting crowns on top of the letters? So God answers Moshe, and he says that because there'll come a time in history when someone named Akiva ben Yosef, now don't forget, Akiva ben Yosef began as an Amaretz. He didn't learn Torah. And he's quoted in the Gemara saying that while I was an Amaretz, a simpleton, if a Talmid Chacham had walked by me, I would have bit him like a donkey. And there's Talmidim say, why not like a dog? Because a dog doesn't chomp on the bone. A donkey, bites the bone. That's how much, frustration, anger, whatever Rabbi Kiva had before he began to learn Torah and turn things around for himself. But God saw him coming. He knew it was going to show up in history later on. And he says that the Akiva ben Yosef will, down the road, after a lot of Torah has been forgotten or lost, or the connections or the sources or whatever, he will use these tagid, he will use these crowns on top of the letters to darshan out tilim of halacha, mounds and mounds of halacha. And Moshe is very impressed. Who is this person? Moshe says, show him to me. So God says, turn around. So he turns around and he has a prophecy. He has a prophecy. And he sees Rabbi Kiva talking to his Talmidim, and he's giving over a halachic discourse. And as he's talking, all this halacha and these, novel ideas, and finally one of his Talmidim, actually before they asked this question, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu became uptight, very upset, started a cold sweat. He didn't recognize any of this. So interesting. Some people actually, took this medrash and they used it to say, not mainstream Judaism, but they use it to say in a full-page ad in the New York Times even, that if the great Moses, didn't know what Rabbi Kiva was going to say down the road, how much more so must we know things today that even Rabbi Kiva didn't know? But the problem is that that's not true. That's false. Because this was at the beginning of Moshe's 40 days, before he learned the Torah, as Rabbi Kiva is about to say, but they kept that part off. They left that part out. They just used the part that was beneficial to themselves, but they cut off the most important part. Because when the Talmidim of Rabbi Kiva asked, where did Rabbi get this from? We never heard this before. So Rabbi Kiva answers, Halacha Moshe Misinai. This, I'm telling you, is passed down from generation to generation since Moshe at Mount Sinai. And then Moshe calmed down because he realized he's going to learn that now. Rabbi Kiva was teaching halacha that Moshe was about to learn before passing it down to all the generations. That's what it says. Then Moshe says a very interesting thing. He says to God, wow, tremendous individual. I mean, you have someone like that, and you're going to give Torah through me? He was a humble person. The Torah says he was the humblest man in ever, Moshe Rabbeinu. And he saw Rabbi Kiva, and he was so impressed by him. He says that you want to give Torah through me when you have a Rabbi Akiva? We're all impressed with Moshe's humility. And then comes the shocker. Then comes Hashem's answer. Shtok, be quiet. Allah b'machshava lefanai. This is what went up in my mind. Now the truth is, if God only said Allah b'machshava lefanai, right? This is what I plan to. This is what I want to do. This is my history. This is my plan for creation, whatever. You don't understand? Fine. Okay. But why shtuk? Why be quiet? What silence? Okay, to the angels, maybe God says silence because they're angels, but to Moshe Rabbeinu, who's asking a valid question, a very, very, he's empathizing, he's sympathizing. He sees that Rabbi Kiva is a great man, so why should he have the schus to be the source of Torah? Okay, he's later down then, but God could bring him the history now if he wants to. That's Moshe's question. But God's answer, interesting. Shtok alam machshava l'fanai. Second concept. That's the second concept. Shtok alam machshava l'fanai. That's the second question. So the commentators talk about this, explain it, but the story doesn't end over there. It goes on. And basically that it says, after this happens, so Moshe Rabbeinu says to Hashem, you showed me his Torah, now show me his schar. Show me the reward he gets for his Mesiras Nefesh, the Torah he's going to teach, etc., etc. So God says, once again, turn around. And he turns around, and this time, what Moshe sees is the Romans selling his flesh in the marketplace. The Gemara in Baruchas later on fills us in. He was raked with combs, metal combs. He died al Kiddush Hashem. He was captured because he was teaching Torah in public. The Romans took him. They tortured him to death, and he died saying the word Echad. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And of course, Moshe Rabbeinu is beside himself. He cannot believe it's Zu Torah, Zu Schar. This is after all the Torah he taught, after all the Mesiras Nefesh he did for the sake of Torah. This is the reward you're going to give him for that Mesiras Nefesh. And again, the answer comes back. And God doesn't say, "I know it's difficult. I understand. You understand, but it's a very high up concept. It looks bad, but it was good. Remember what happened, in Mitzrayim with the whole thing with the increased slavery, and you had problems with that. In the end, it worked out for the better. You have to just trust me with this, okay? I've got things under control." God doesn't say that. He says, "Shtok," once again, be quiet. Allah machshava lefanai. Second concept. So where does that fit into hashkafa? What's that telling us? What are we supposed to learn from that? So that itself, by the way, is a shir in Kabbalah alone. Has to do with the spheres and like that. But I'll just give you a very, very short answer. It actually ties in very much what happens also in Har Sinai when Moshe is talking to God after he gets forgiveness for the Jewish people from the sin of the golden calf. So Moshe realizes it's an Eis Ratzon. It's a good time to ask for things because God's in a good mood now. So he says to God, show me your glory. And God says, no man, I can't show you my face because no man can see my face and live. So I show the back of my head, and the Gemara says it's on the back of God's head, so to speak. It's filling that, which of course is all metaphorical and deep stuff. And guys, everything's a shir to itself. Everything's like just go up a tangent, become a whole shir. You start understanding all these very important details about life and history. It's worth taking the time, by the way. It certainly is. But the point is that there's levels in understanding. Again, a thing we take for granted. Knowledge. What's knowledge? Knowledge. An idea. You ask me a question, I give you an answer. There are also high concepts, very sophisticated concepts. You walk into a quantum mechanics lecture accidentally, and there's this huge equation on the board. There's all these numbers and letters and things like that, and there are people. Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You're going, what is that? That looks like my 4-year-old scribbling on a piece of paper. It makes absolutely no sense to me, right? And there are concepts, but it can be explained. You can take time. They became physics, professors because they like it. And they took the time. They had to start from scratch, and they built up until they understood these concepts and experimentation, observation, methodology, all this stuff until they got to this level. It's possible, and the very fact that they're talking about it, teaching it, shows you that it is. And then there's very high, esoteric concepts, the soul, worlds and things like that. And you open, the Arizal, it's Chaim, and it's very complex and very complicated. And the Zohar, it's like a closed book for many people, for most people. But the fact that it's written down means it can be understood. If you take the time and you make the effort, you could work it out. You can understand it. It might take your whole life, but it's possible because it's there on the page, meaning it's accessible. But even that's a fraction. When Moshe came down the mountain with the first set of tablets, before he broke them, there were only 2 commandments on them. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Mitzrayim. And lo hiye Elohim acherim. There shouldn't be other gods besides me. Only 2 mitzvahs. That's it. So you say, wow, only 2 mitzvahs. What happened to the 611? Well, all the other 364 negative mitzvahs were all included in the one mitzvah, lo hiye Elohim acherim. And all the other 247 positive mitzvahs were all incorporated in the first mitzvah, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Because on the level the Jewish people got to at Mount Sinai when they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do it, and we will understand, and they got the crowns and all that. So they got to such a high level that when they did the mitzvah, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, they automatically were able to fulfill every single positive mitzvah and everything they did. And likewise, when they fulfilled the mitzvah of Lo hiye Elohim acherim, there should be other gods besides me, they were able to fulfill all the negative mitzvahs in that. But once they did the chet, the sin of the golden calf, and they lost the crown, so then every mitzvah had to be spelled out. Because now there was no guarantee that by doing this mitzvah, the person will know to do that mitzvah too. You have to learn it. We dropped the levels of understanding. So the level of Torah we have today is called Torah's Bria. It's called the Torah of the world in which we live in. And the level of the Torah that Moshe came down with is called Torah's Mashiach, Torah's Atzilus. It's a whole different level of Torah. And there are concepts in there that we cannot possibly grasp right now. We don't even access the higher levels of our soul at this stage of history because it's just way outside the box. So as high as we get, we don't get high enough. And if you go high enough, there's different names for these levels. One of these levels is called Machshava. It's called Machshava. Machshava usually translates as mind or thoughts, right? A person's machshava, right? Robust machshava, many other thoughts of a person, right? Machshava. But it happens to correspond to a very high level up in the spheres, a level that's so high that when God says to Moshe, no man can see my face and live, it means the level of light, the level of divine understanding. Because everything down here comes from that. If it's down here, it has to come from up there. But by the time it comes down here, it's so filtered. It's like taking water. You filter water. It starts off from the river. It's got all kinds of pollutants inside. You filter the water, but then get to the water, it's like all the stuff is taken out. So likewise, as the light's being filtered, it comes down, becomes less holy, and more tangible. And God was telling Moshe Rabbeinu, he wasn't telling him, be quiet. You're annoying me. You have no business asking this question. Mind your own business, If this is what I want to do, I'm God. It wasn't that what he wasn't saying that. Shtok meant, according to the Leshem, he explains, that God was telling him, for me to be able to explain to you what is going on here, which is such a phenomenally high concept and tikkun for creation, the death of Rabbi Akiva, it would require words, because you're still in a body, and that's the way we communicate. Even if I talk to your brain, your mind, it still requires words. You're in a level where communication still requires the formation of these ideas and put them into tangible concepts. But you have to understand, this is coming from the level of machshava. From the level of machshava, which means it's a level of light that the body, if it were to be exposed to it, could never survive that light. It's just too powerful light. It's like pouring 10,000 gallons of water into a crystal glass. Shatters in all different directions. Can't have that can't handle that type of pressure. So God says, shtok, meaning there's nothing to say. There's no words. Don't bother asking. One day, when you die and you go up and you see the world from a higher perspective and your soul has a capacity to understand, much, much, much more on a much higher level, so then it'll make sense to you. But in the meantime, Allah b'chmashav lefanai. You can understand it's the same as Kafshir Rahmana, same idea that there are things, it's not just God's keeping a secret. He'd love to tell us, he'd love to share it with us. But for the sake of free will, for the sake of history, for the sake of going to the world to come, we have to go through stages. And the stage you're at right now means that things are going to happen that can be so primordial, so primal, go so high, so close to the top, that there's no way in our physical existence right now to be able to get to them, understand them, and communicate them. That's concept number 2. Concept number 3 is spoken about in Shar HaGilgulim. It's the first place I actually came across it, the first place I actually saw it. And in that concept, he's talking, Reb Chaim Vital was the prime student of the Arizal. The Arizal gave over this information, but he didn't write books. He had some handwritten notes and things like that he left behind, but the person who was basically charged with the responsibility of keeping track of what the Arizal was teaching was Reb Chaim Vital. And he had manuscripts. They mentioned and spoken about in the different places in the writings of the Arizal, but it was primarily by the hand of Reb Chaim Vital. And Shar HaGilgulim, which is the 8th section of the writings of the Arizal, talks about tikkunim, how to go about rectifying yourself, how to, how reincarnation works, and different types of reincarnation, and history, and how that fits in the whole thing. And he happens to mention, this is a little bit more complicated in some respects because you have to understand concepts like the klipos, for example. What are the klipos? Well, without going into too much detail about how they came into existence in the first place, but the point is that we see and we recognize, and it's clear, that there are two basic forces in creation. Tov v'ra, good and evil. And good will allow us and inspire us and energize us to do the will of God, the way he wants it to be done. And if we're really good about it, we'll buy into it as well and enjoy doing it. What's the bad do, right? Well, the bad basically interferes with our ability to serve God and to connect to him. That's its job. Because without that, we'd have no free will choice. You need the evil for the sake of the good. Otherwise, there's just no free will choice. There's no way to earn. That's the key phrase here. Earn your schar, your reward, in the world to come. So you have to have evil. And one of the prime Kabbalistic names, at least, of evil is the word klipot. Klipot literally means peels. There's a klipa on an egg peel. There's a klipa on an orange peel. And a klipa serves a specific purpose. It makes a boundary between the outside and the inside. By food, it's for the sake of preserving the food inside. If it wasn't for the klipa, the food would go bad. Cut up an orange, leave it around for a while, and the orange will go bad. Same thing by an egg. But the klipa keeps it free of the air, the oxygen in the air. Won't oxidize, won't go through the process of going moldy and all that, or at least takes longer. But that's how a klipa works. Likewise, the klipot in the world of tov v'ra work very similarly, but with one basic difference, and that is that they also try to keep the outside from coming in, meaning that the point of the klipa is to act as a barrier and primarily over the heart of a person, not physically, spiritually, between the person and God. They're that thing in creation that gives a person a sense that God doesn't exist, or if he exists, he doesn't care, or if he cares, he's not watching me, or I'm not strong enough to do this right thing, or I'm tempted and I know the right thing, but I can't handle it, and whatever it is, in the end, that intercedes between the person's heart and the reality of God has to do with something called the klipos, the thing called the sitra achra. He's an angel. His job also, in the word satan means to abstract. It's all part of the free will scenario. With the Yetzer Hara inside of ourselves, a tendency, our own personal klipa, the result calls it, that nudges at us to keep doing the wrong thing the entire time. Again, all for the sake of free will. So it's a war. And the Mesil Shem speaks about this war. And so does this in the introduction to Derech Hashem. There's an ongoing war inside of us all the time, between good and bad, right? To do the right thing, do the wrong thing. It's, and he says, if you think the war is over, if you think I've conquered that negative side, if the bad conquers the good, forget it. The person's pretty much gone, and it's very hard to bring them back, or they'll just be a nasty person. Or very atheistic, very agnostic. They're just not going to. If a person is in the battle, says the Mesil Shem, he's going to be constantly fighting over every issue. Even a thing as simple as brushing your teeth a certain way is a good and bad issue, because there's a better way and there's a worse way. Who cares? Because if I do the worst way, my teeth won't survive the way they're supposed to. And I've admitted the Raisa, I tore mitzvah to take care of my health. So whatever it takes to take care of my health and to appreciate what I have. Teeth are very important. How much more so when it comes to the more serious moral decisions about life and what to think and how to apply yourself and et cetera, et cetera. So the klipos and the sitra achra and the Yetzer, all these things combined together. Malach HaMavis, the angel of death, it's all one package deal. They know, because it's pre-programmed, and what does it mean? They know because anyhow they work for God, and God understands, but it's set up in a way, like a play where everything's being acted out for the sake of us to make our free will real. And they know there's a thing called redemption, and they're against it because they know once the redemption comes, they're finished. Their job is over. Once the final redemption occurs, then basically there's no room for free will anymore. No need for free will, no reason to have evil. Evil's gone. And as Zechariah says, we read the end of Aleinu at least 3 times a day. On that day, God will be king over the entire land. He will be one. His name will be one. Everyone's going to know. Anyone surviving into the Messianic era will never again question the existence of God, never again question the divinity of Torah. And everybody naturally with the Yetzer Hara will want to do what God says because they'll believe in it. It'll make sense to them as well. And they know that, and they fight against that. So whatever they can do to interfere with the redemption process, or stopping a person who might contribute to that process, they'll hang on as much as possible against it. Now, here's the tricky part. How do they even do this? So Reb Chaim Vital explains, and you can see this in Shagid Lili, that basically, when Adam did the sin, when he ate from the tree of knowledge and evil, before, it changed everything. Before that sin, all the souls of all of mankind that ever were going to come out in history until Mashiach comes were all incorporated in him. He had them all. He was a giant, a spiritual giant, huge, massive spiritual giant with all the souls, billions of people. Well, a lot of our reused souls anyhow, but certainly a lot of souls were all inside of him. Everybody's, until Mashiach comes. He did the chet, he sinned. So then it says in Shar HaGilgulim that all the extra souls, any soul that was not for his own sake or for Cain and Hevel's sake, his son's sake, they all fell off of him. Where did they fall? Where did they go to? So it says they fell into the klippas. They actually fell into that spiritual swamp. It's like walking into, the red light district of a city, or some place where there's violence all the time as a way of life, and trying to survive there. And without your gun, and you're a nice person, you happen to wander into the wrong place. You don't want this stuff. It's not part of who you are. But you're going to have a tough time getting through it because it is dangerous. And because you stand out so much, they're going to come after you. Anybody else living there might have a gun, a knife, and is rough, is used to this stuff. So they're kind of protected. They're amongst their own. But you, the innocent person walking to this place, this nasty part of town, dangerous, very dangerous. So likewise, all the souls that fell off of Adam Rishon fell into the spiritual reality called the klippas, and they have to come out of there before they come into this world. My soul, your soul, her soul, his soul, every soul. They all began in the klippas. And they explained that the holier the soul, the deeper it falls in the klippas. Like a soul like David HaMelech would have been very deep inside the klippas. To get it out, it takes a lot of time. And explains why that's the whole story about what happens with David HaMelech, why his whole birth is questionable and all that, because it fools the klippas. So he mentions a concept called mirma utachbolis, literally, which means, it means like trickery and machination, planning. That sometimes, not even sometimes, a lot of the time, you have to deal with the klippas in a tricky kind of a way. So he explains, for example, how the Rizal explained to him, because he knew these things, how his own soul, how Chaim Vital's soul left the klippas. And he says, because they thought he was one of them. His soul seemed to have a tendency that if it would come into the world, would end up doing bad stuff. They would do stuff that would make him a slave to the klippas. He would not be someone who could facilitate redemption, not someone who's going to learn Torah, teach Torah, and be a part of the redemption process. That's what they thought, because that's the way it was made to appear. And when the time came for his soul to leave the klippas, I know this is very mystical and esoteric, but the conclusion is the point over here. When it came time for his soul to come out, so they let it happen. They even helped it to happen. was only after his soul came into a body and was in this world that God then directed him towards the Rizal, eventually older, of course, right? And it became the great Chaim Vital, who became a tremendous enemy of the Klippas in the end. But the concept is a concept. Mirma techbolis, trickery and false approach to a situation. In other words, if it's a time when the Jewish people are living by Torah and doing the mitzvahs, like in Shlomo Melech's time, for example, where we had the base of Mikdash, we had the temple, we're doing things right. Everyone's, or Chizki's time, we're doing it the way it's supposed to be done. So then we're using our free will appropriately. We're making good choices. God's going to help us. The Klippas are weak. They'll be strong enough to test a person to have free will and still make choices. But it says, for example, that you weren't allowed to convert to Judaism during the time of Shlomo Melech and David Melech, because it was so clear that Torah was true and Torah was right that people would not convert for the right reasons. So, when that's the case, then we don't have to worry about the force of impurity. We don't have to worry about the Sitra Achra so much. We don't have to worry about the Satan. We don't have to worry about all those negative forces, because God will protect us from them, because we are doing what we're supposed to do. The problem comes when we're not doing everything right. And even that's not entirely the problem. The problem comes when we're not doing everything right, but we need something to happen that's Gula oriented. It has to do with redemption. And the Sitra Achra looking down, seeing it, Avram coming to Israel. He knew what was going on over there. He wanted to stop it. He wanted to fear. He knows this is not good for the bad guys. And likewise with David Melech and other people in history, where they looked down, the Vilna Gaon was on his way to Israel to help with the resettling of the Yishuv of Israel on the way to the final redemption. He got sent home. Things didn't work in his favor. He's a great man, and why can't he go against it? Because they get set up in such a way that the calculation is so complex. And the long story is, he was forced to go home. And I think I must have read it not just once, but even twice, but once for sure. And it's a mystery to a lot of people why it had to happen. But that's the way it works. If we're doing things to facilitate the redemption process at a time that we don't have the merit for heavenly help, then things will go wrong. The Klippas will interfere. But what happens if God wants it to happen anyhow? So, Mirma Tachbolis. Mirma Tachbolis basically means that God will do things in such a way that will make it look as if it's not redemption, when in fact it's fitting into redemption. But by the time the Klippas wake up and see what's going on, it's too late. So by the time they realize that Chaim Vital was going to be the number one student of the Rizal, it was too late. They couldn't really stop it. They did try to interfere. Things happened to him. But nonetheless, he got away. In the end, he did his job. He wrote his manuscripts, and we have the Kisrei Arizal to learn from to this very day. And other cases he brings down. David Melech, for example. His soul was destined from the beginning to be the ancestor of Mashiach. We can go back even further. Go back to Lot and his daughters. Strangest, most bizarre story you can possibly imagine. A man escapes with two of his daughters and his wife, but she looks back, becomes a pillar of salt, and now he only has his two daughters. And they go to some cave someplace, and there's wine in the cave. I mean, how many caves you go into and find a bottle of wine? And it wasn't Mavushal, but he didn't have to have Mavushal anyhow. And this whole episode unfolds where it's literally incest. And from this incest, and not just that, but two sons are born from this. When does it happen so automatically like that? And the one that of the older one is called Moab, which is actually admitting that it came from her father, and yet this is the ancestor of Ruth, who gets married to Elchadon's son, and they left Israel when they shouldn't have. So they were living in Moab at a time that was actually forbidden to do so. And the commentators speak about that, and they actually die there. And as a result of this, eventually Naomi is supposed to go back to the wife of Elchad, and go back to all the Boaz. We saw it on Shavuos. You can read it again for yourself. Very, very complicated, upside down, backward story to do what? To bring this spark. By the way, just as a side point, when the Gemara is talking about learning Torah lo lishma for the sake of learning lishma, in other words, even if you have to learn for the wrong reasons, for the sake of getting to the point you can learn for the right reasons, you should do it. The Gemara says an example is Balak, a couple of parshas ago. And the merit of the 42 sacrifices that Balak offered to God, 42 sacrifices for the sake of Christian and Jewish people. And the merit of that, Rus, Moaviah, came from Balak. So many weird connections here. And eventually, she gets smuggled in, so to speak, in Eretz Yisrael. Then Boaz's wife dies at the same time, coincidentally. And the whole thing happens with Yibum. And as the book of Rus finishes off, so then that's when eventually, creates the relationship of Yibum, and she becomes the ancestors of David HaMelech. And again, a very bizarre story that the Sitra Achra looks down and the Klippas look and say, well, nothing can come from this. I mean, this is Lot with his daughters. Lot himself who's he? He's the nephew of Abraham, but this guy is living at Stom, of all places. That's where he chooses to live. He can live with Abraham or go to Stom. He chooses Stom. Who does that if you're a righteous person? And then his daughters, the whole thing, this cannot result in anything to do with redemption. So the Sitra Achra backs off. The Klippas look the other way until later on, when finally the whole thing happens, and they see Rus is born. They still don't, she's a Gentile princess. Okay, so now she marries a Jew, but he's a sinner. But he dies, right? And she's making her way back in Israel, and all of a sudden with Boaz, the whole thing unfolds, but again, God has pulled the wool over our eyes, right? And confused us and surprised us in all of this. And this is called Mima Tachbolos, and you find this throughout history so many times. With Rachav, I mean, the Torah talks about Rachav. Rachav, well, not the Torah itself, but she shows up in the book of Yeshua. She's the one who led the Jewish people, or at least, kept the spies alive. The Jewish people could attack Yericho and destroy it. And she was saved because of it, but she was a prostitute. She was a zona for 40 years. The Gemara talks about this. And then she marries Yeshua after she does tshuva and converts. These are all such bizarre things. But again, what's amazing is how we then approach Jewish history as if it should be straightforward. We look at things that are strange today. This can't be redemption. For example, how is it possible for miracles to be done for a secular state? How is it possible that God's involved in the establishment of the modern state of Israel when the people doing it have nothing to do with redemption? On the contrary, they reject Jewish principles. They don't believe in Torah. They want to make it more like a European state. How can this be, part of the redemption process? But Mima Tachbolos says 100% for sure it's part of that process. And this has been going on all through Jewish history. And you look at the situation today, and it seems so backwards, and things are going on. The amount of corruption and falsehood and just pure evil, and that people put up with it, and God allows it to go on, and it's frightening. And it seems like the world's out of control. And we've seen what the world looks like was out of control. But even the Holocaust is called Gezer Hashem. It wasn't, the world was Hefker. The world went to World War II. It's crazy how many people died between both world wars, and how the Jews were treated and killed and murdered for so many years before finally the Holocaust came to an end. But God was in charge the entire time. It was all part of the redemption process. We have questions, 100%. Questions we can't answer, for sure. Things like that, like Rabbi Kiva dying. And Moshe saying, even the angels questioned God and said, "Why is he dying like this? This man, after all he's done, he should die by neshika. He should die by divine kiss, like Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov did." And God says, "Be quiet. If you don't be quiet, I'll turn the world back to null and void once again." And you have to understand this is the process of Jewish history. These ideas are constantly playing all the time. They're in the background. We go through periods of history where everything seems to be normal, makes a lot of sense. But the truth is, in behind the scenes, if you check things out, things are going on that just don't they baffle us, and so many times, personally, I see things, I read things in newspapers, or I see the news, or I hear about it from somebody else, and you hear what the people are saying, or you hear what was done, and you say to yourself, how could a person do a thing like that? How can a person stoop so low? How can a person live with themselves when they talk like that, or live like that, or do things like that? And there's two answers. One answer is that people become so distant from the truth, so detached from the reality of God, that they have no moral compass anymore. And whatever works for me, that's what counts. And the second reason is because people become like that, God uses them. They're pawns in a bigger game. And it may not make sense to us, but it makes sense to God. So how are we supposed to deal with all this? How are we supposed to navigate this? How do we sail on waters that are so disruptive and confusing and meandering, and going places we can't even see? The fog is so thick we can't even navigate what we're supposed to do. So we have a Torah, and we have the Nevi'im, and that alone, by the way, should be enough to get a person back on track. Read the Torah from front to back. We're about to go into Devarim as Hashem. And in Devarim, he's talking about the end of days. Moshe is summing up the entire Torah. He's talking about kibbutz galus. It has to be kibbutz galus. The Torah talks about kibbutz galus. You might go to the four corners of the world. God said, I'm going to bring you back. It's going to happen. It's a fait accompli. You don't imagine that's going to change ever. So ask yourself, if I'm around at that time, where am I going to be? What will I be? Do I wait to have it happen to me? Do I have to have myself dragged from another country? Or, God forbid, in the past when God wanted to move us around, he used anti-Semitism, ferocious anti-Semitism. Do I want to be able to see that? Or do I make a move now? And you open the book of Nevi'im, specifically, you can start with the ones I talk about the end of days. Nevi'im include lots of different prophecy. But look at the ones talking about the end of days, about the war of Gog and Magog, and ask yourself, where do I want to be when that happens? Because as they say, you can run, you can't hide, and you can't run really when it comes to God. So, just that alone. But then look at the Gemaras, because the Gemaras also talk about this and talk about Eretz Yisrael and the importance of Eretz Yisrael in our lives, and how we're supposed to, direct our lives and think in terms of redemption. Look at the Shemona Esrei. Pay attention. One of the biggest tricks of Amalek, of the Erev Rav, of the Klippas, of the Sitra Achra, it's all one thing in the end. One of the biggest tricks is distraction, to pull us into everyday life, everyday mundane reality. And because of that, we forget about the long-term goals of Jewish people. And we can't afford to do that, not anymore. So, take the time now. Take the time now to sit down and to work it out. We didn't go to the fourth one, I realize that. Hashem, I think we'll start with that one next week and go with the next idea from this idea. But at least there's first three to think about in the meantime. You have to think about it, give it a lot of thought, even if you live in Eretz Yisrael. Because, as the Gemara says in Hedron, Kol Yisrael Ravim Zelazeh, every Jew is a guarantor for another Jew, for every other Jew, which means that by definition, we're all connected, and we're all connected no matter where we are in the world. It's our problem too. It's our reality too. It's our solution too. So take the time, do the reading, do the research, think about it. Let it go through your head. Discuss it. Talk about it. Don't even talk about it. You have to talk about it. Not necessarily the Shabbos table, although it's not the worst place to start. But I will just add that we are now going into a period of time where probably the most important midah to have, important trait to master, is bitachon and emunah, trust and faith in God, because history will start making a lot less sense, just like it did in the 1930s, and just like it did in other times in history. And if you want to be able to survive it mentally, emotionally, and even physically, you have to be ready for it. You have to have the bitachon and emunah. You have to know how far your knowledge can go, and know that you have the bitachon and emunah to take you the next distance, the full distance after that. It's not something you just turn on and turn off. It's like a muscle that has to be developed. That should be the discussions at the Shabbos table. Every Shabbos meal should have a discussion about bitachon, a vort, something, the sforim. Individuals, this is the time to sharpen that skill. This is the time to pick up that ability, to strengthen it, to make it powerful, because it will be a person's saving grace. as we move further and closer to the final redemption that should come, God willing, peacefully, without all the negative stuff we've been warned about, and that we can look back at this and say, well, it was interesting, but thank God it wasn't necessary. And have a good Shabbos.
Rabbi, do we have time for any questions?
We do.
Well, actually, I have a question. Josh, see anybody with questions?
There's one question here. Pesach Kirshner asked in the beginning, where is Hashem when we need him the most? I'm not sure what that was connected to, but...
In the beginning, he wrote
I understand the question. I mean, basically, what I was trying to say the entire time, which maybe perhaps didn't come out so clearly, is that he's here the entire time. You know, there's a famous story that was written a long time ago. It's been quoted so many different times, where the person says, all through my life, I saw two sets of footprints, and then all of a sudden one day I noticed only one set of footprints, where are you, God? I needed you. And God answers, says, those are my footprints. I was carrying you at the time. So the mashal, the idea basically means God is alive and well and is involved in our history as ever before right now. The reason why he's so hit, the reason why things are going the direction they're going is because during the good times, when it was quiet and peaceful, we didn't go looking for him. We just took our lives for granted. The Jewish people, just they go back and see. People went to work, they went to minyan first and daven the same way every day, same tefillah. The discussions, the drushes, halacha, there was no discussion about redemption, no discussion about Eretz Yisrael, no discussion about even Jewish history and coming closer to God. And even the Musar talks were more like almost beneno mechavero than anything else. So God said, listen, if you don't need me, I'll do this on my own. I work behind the scenes. You have to know, God is as much, Hester Panim does not mean that God disappears. Hester Panim means that it's a merit to be able to see God working in history. It's a merit. If you don't have that merit, you won't be able to see it. But he's still working. He's still doing his thing. Just bearing it somewhat and make it more mystical. But the good news is, if you take the time and make the effort to go find him in history, he'll show up. And then your question will disappear.
So my question is two things. Number one, will you please maybe consider making next week's topic on how we can talk about Emunah and Bitachon and raise that consciousness at the table? Because many of us have been talking about Eretz Israel and redemption and things, but we don't know where to take it from there. So maybe you could address that next week.
It's actually what I plan to talk about next week as a follow-up to this one. So B'ezras Hashem will be there, and I just want to finish with the fourth one before going into that.
Right, and then I was just also wondering, with all that's going on right now with the let's go back to that COVID virus because it hasn't gone away anyway. And I'm not going to ask you even to tell me what is it teaching us or whatever, because you can do that too in a whole hour's or more. But what I see happening now is a lot of sinas chinam happening between groups, and this one's blaming that one, and the other one's blaming the other one, and that's really been very painful for me personally, because I have dear friends in both groups, and I'm part of. I go back and forth, and many people do, and I'm just I don't know what to say to people, and I feel like I don't know what this all means for us. Like, are we ever going to get it together to like each other?
Well, first, fully like each other, that's going to take Mashiach. That's a messianic task.
Okay.
The individual has to do the best they can and just know that other people aren't as qualified to do it. But God is an archer, right? He's like, like an archer, so to speak. An archer is somebody who aims for a target, shoots his arrow. Now, if a person's an amateur and he hits even the bullseye, you wonder if that's what he's aiming for, because he's not so accurate. It's either lucky day. But a professional archer, even if you can't see what he's aiming for, whatever he hits, you can assume that's what he wanted to hit, because he's so good. He's such a professional. So we can't. That's what God meant when He said to Moshe, "You cannot see me from the front, but I'll let you see me from the back." God was saying, you won't be able to anticipate everything I'm doing and understand in advance why I'm doing it. But after it's happened, if you look at the net effect of what's taking place, you'll understand better what I was aiming for. Because whatever the effect is, that's what I want to come out. So what does it mean? It means if the coronavirus forces us to go home from the shuls. There's something about what we did in the shuls that was inappropriate, wasn't good, wasn't the right way, or tefillah b'tzibur. Whatever it is that's being taken away from you, that's what God meant to take away from you. And if he's taking it away from you, you have to then ask the question, so what did we do wrong with that? Why did God find that not a reich nechayach, right? A pleasing sense, or sense. Why did God not, why did he feel it was important, or that we have to go on our own, so we have to be bedewed with it, and it went away and then started to come back again. The Israeli government, should have been more careful, it was all a ploy. That's just the means. That's just the don't get fooled. That's just the mechanism. Whatever people think and do, God's making them do that. If it went away and came back, it means that we didn't get the lesson the first time. If we didn't get the lesson the first time, I've done it in a few minyanim since this whole thing has happened, and I see people adapting but not changing. The tefillahs are just as fast, just as thoughtless. Okay, people can read very quickly, but the brain takes time to process things. I'll just tell you, when it comes to anybody else and anything else, business deals, people linger, they spend time, you go to shidduch, you go out for dinner with your wife, your husband, whatever, you take time, unless it's bad food, bad restaurant, right? But if you're having a good day, if you're enjoying yourself, you linger, and you take the time, and you speak things out, and you're so why tefillah? We don't believe in tefillah. That's not real. Ask yourself. It's not something that you can answer difference, but ask yourself: do I daven as well as I can daven? Am I real with this? And if I'm not, is there a way to become more real with it? Because you may not care if you're closer to God, but God cares if you're closer to Him. And if He cares and you don't care, then you see He finds ways to make us care too, and that's what we want to avoid. We always go that route, So we have just one word. All of this is to create change in the Jewish people that we weren't making it on our own. So ask ourselves, what do we need to change? What can we improve? And then the rest follows from that. But anybody who just brushes it off, just takes it in stride and doesn't change, is just asking for worse. Just asking for worse. God forbid.
Thank you. Thanks, Rabbi. Good job. Good work, Rabbi.
Thank you so much for everyone joining the broadcast today. We can be seen on YouTube, on Facebook, and on IsraelTorah.org. Please also visit youtube.com/IsraelTorah. This shir was dedicated for Refuah Shlema for Yosef ben Malka. And when you go to the site, I encourage everyone who goes to the Israel Torah site to investigate, to do some research and look around, because there's lots of different elements there, including a podcast that I have daily. We're going to have a live show on a weekly basis. We have the blog. We have all sorts of things over there, many, many videos. When you go to the videos at youtube.com/Israel Torah, you can also subscribe to that channel and press the bell, which basically gives you notifications when we put on the new videos. So please go ahead and do that now. And again, we thank you for joining, and have a great Shabbos.
One more thing, Josh, maybe you want to remind or tell people for the first time about next Tuesday night.
Yes, so next Tuesday night we have an amazing opportunity for everyone who is contemplating Aliyah. We have an expert on the line. It's going to be a senior advisor from Nefesh B'Nefesh. He's going to be taking questions. And for anyone out there that is involved, is interested, or just someone who's willing to listen to different aspects of Aliyah, he's going to be speaking about those different aspects. He's going to, like I said, be taking questions. So if anybody has any questions about the Aliyah process, this is your time to be able to ask those questions. Again, that is going to be July 21st. It's going to be, what were the times for?
8:30 to 9:30 Israel time.
Israel time, which is 1:30 to 2:30.
In New York.
Eastern Standard.
We will post this on Facebook. We will post this on the websites. And we will have a lot of emails going around too. If you want to sign up for emails on the Miriam Project at gmail.com, or you could find us in a lot of different ways. We'll be posting it far and wide. We'll be letting you know when. His name is Eli Bialik. Will be speaking with us. And I met Rabbi Fast today in the grocery store. He's very excited about this. He said he's got a lot of information that he's giving Eli to give over to us. And be ready with your questions. He'll answer all your questions, God willing.
Wonderful. Thank you again for everybody for joining. We'll see you next week. Have a great Shabbos.
Thank you. Good Shabbos.